Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Liz Schaefer, and I'm the Director of Fraternity and Sorority Programs at Tulane. Today, we're going to be talking about sorority recruitment and intake and what parents need to know and how they can support their students through these processes. The Office of Fraternity and Sorority Programs is a department within the Division of Student Affairs. We report up through the Assistant Vice President for Campus Life. Myself and our assistant director are the two full-time staff members, and we're also supported by two graduate assistants. Our contact information is on the screen, and we encourage parents to contact us at any point during their student's career here, whether it's during the sorority recruitment process with questions or once your student has joined one of our organizations. We have a lot of common questions that we hear from parents, and we're going to cover several of those today. Tulane has 11 active sororities. They are organized into 3 different groups that are called councils. The first of those is our Panhellenic Council, and it currently has 7 organizations, and the average size of those groups is 182. All 7 of those sororities has a sorority house, and those are facilities that are not owned or maintained by the university. They're privately owned off campus. And some of them have a small live-in component. It's not a system where students are required at any point to live in the sorority house unless they happen to hold a specific office that is required by the chapter's bylaws to live in. And that live-in component for the few that do have it is quite small. Those that do house folks have only 3 or 4 people living in. And so what that means is that the houses really provide a true home away from home for the members. Casual living room space with nice big TVs where they can catch up on Netflix shows, or kitchens where they can prepare meals, and very frequently the Panhellenic sororities have meals catered in, a Friday lunch, or maybe Monday morning bagels, things like that. So it's a great place for them to get away from campus. We also have 2 other types of sororities, as I mentioned. The first is those of our National Panhellenic Council, and those are historically Black organizations, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Those groups right now average in size at about 8 women. And then we also have 2 sororities that are members of our Multicultural Greek Council. Those are Delta Xi Nu and Gamma Rho Lambda. And none of those groups, the National Panhellenic Council or the Multicultural Greek Council groups, have housing. And yet they still have really active lives on campus and sponsor all types of activities. I did want to mention that we also have a 12th sorority that is chartered at the university but is currently suspended. That is Alpha Epsilon Phi, which is a member of our Panhellenic Council. They are suspended through May of 2016, and so they are not operating this year. All of the sororities are values-based organizations, and their values are centered around the same types of things: sisterhood, scholarship, leadership, and philanthropy and community service. But the ways that they reflect those values are what show the differences in the groups. And their typical activities are all pretty similar. They have lots of social activities, lots of fun things that they do together, community service activities, fundraising activities, all types of different things. Parents often ask us about the time commitment required of a woman who joins a sorority and how she's able to balance that with her academics and with other activities that she may already be involved in at Tulane. The time commitment is really flexible, and it's dependent upon how much a woman wants to put into the experience and how much she wants to get out of it. Officers of the sorority, of course, spend a little bit more time, and as a first-year new member, your daughter may have the opportunity to serve as an officer within her new member class, so that might increase her time commitment a little bit. But typically what you would be looking at for a new member in her first semester is about 5 to 10 hours a week. That time can be comprised of a couple of different things. So it's very typical for there to be a weekly new member meeting, which is an educational, done in an educational setting to teach the women about the values of the sorority, about their history and the typical activities that they do. Then there's also generally a weekly chapter meeting, which all of the members go to, and that's a business meeting where they're learning about what's happening in the upcoming weeks and months within the group. Then there are also outside activities, so that may be social events or community service events or tutoring at a local school or just a mixer with a fraternity, all kinds of different things that they may be doing. And those activities, the latter ones that I mentioned, are things that are optional. But the most important thing to remember is that students' academic commitments are the most important thing. We firmly believe that students are here at Tulane first and foremost to receive an education. And we're fortunate that our organizations really believe that too. They strongly believe that their organization's members should be actively involved in other things on campus, and they don't see membership in other groups or activities as something that detracts from their sorority membership. Rather, they see it as something that adds value to the entire group. In some cases, the organizations require their members to be involved in at least one other campus organization, and whether or not it's required, we really see it across the board that most folks who are involved in a fraternity and sorority are also involved in a couple of other things on campus, whether that be as an orientation team leader or a student government officer, a resident advisor, a peer health educator, somebody in an academic club. There's a wide range of things that our students are also involved in. Scholarship is, of course, one of the most important tenets of Greek membership, and often there's the assumption that once you join a fraternity or sorority, you're going to be a little bit distracted and your grades will go down. But we're really proud to say that that is not the case within our organizations. Our sororities and fraternities are really competitive about their grades. They try really hard to beat one another out on who has the highest GPA in a given semester, and you can find GPA data for all of our groups on our website. But they do that healthy competition by promoting scholastic achievement within the groups. So they will have things like academic mentors for a student who may be struggling, or they may even just have a study group comprised of all the neuroscience majors or of all the finance majors. So they really are able to have a strong supportive environment in which they can focus on their academics. You can see the GPA data on our screen. And those data show that all sorority women as a composite group have a higher GPA than all undergraduate women, and that's also the case for all sorority new members. So in their first semester last year of membership, the new members were still higher than all undergraduate women. And these are data that have held true with the sorority women having a higher GPA than the average undergraduate women for more than 15 years. Parents often ask us about the costs to join, and that's a very reasonable question, of course. And so we've got up on the screen for you some average costs. For our Panhellenic sororities, the costs range between about $650 and $800 a semester, depending upon the group. And when students are going through the sorority recruitment process, they receive information clearly delineating the costs associated with each group. We update those annually to make sure we've got the most up-to-date costs for each group. And so if your daughter is choosing to go through Panhellenic sorority recruitment, you'll want to ask her about what the costs associated with each group are. The first semester of membership is a bit more expensive because there are some one-time fees that are paid either to the national organization as a new member fee or to the local organization as a new member fee. And there's also an initiation fee as well as often a badge fee for the sorority pin or piece of jewelry that they receive. For our NPHC and multicultural sororities, the costs are not quite as high, and some of that comes from the fact that they don't have houses to support. On average, those organizations are charging about $150 per semester. And we often are asked what exactly all that money goes to. And the answer is it goes to all of the things that the sororities do together and for their members and for the community. So to some degree, they're covering costs that go to their national organizations. So the membership programming that happens across the board at all chapters of a different group, insurance costs, fees for traveling staff who come down and visit the chapters, all of those things are covered in their dues. But the great majority of the money that they pay stays with the local chapter and is used for the activities that they do on a daily and weekly basis. In order for a student to participate in Panhellenic recruitment, or in membership intake, which is the process used by our NPHC and multicultural organizations, there are some eligibility requirements set by the university. The first of those is a pretty clear and easy one. They all have to be undergraduate students at Tulane. They must have earned at least a 2.5 cumulative GPA, and that is a number that is not rounded up. So when your student receives her grades by logging into the Gibson online system, if it doesn't say 2.500 or more, she will not be eligible to go through recruitment. We don't round up. Students must be free of any conduct charges either through the Office of Student Conduct or through the Office of Academic Integrity in Newcomb-Tulane College. They can't be on any sanctions, and if they have any pending charges, they'll need to contact our office so that we can work with either the conduct staff or the Newcomb-Tulane College Dean staff to determine where they are in that pending process. And finally, students also need to have earned at least 12 credit hours, and that is also an area in which we hold hard and fast. We don't round up the number of hours, so if someone has only completed 11 or 11 and a half hours, they will not be eligible to participate. As I mentioned, the process for our NPHC and multicultural sororities is called membership intake. And each of these organizations schedules their membership intake process on their own schedule. They do that in consultation with their national organization or with their local graduate alumni advisors. Generally, if an organization decides that they're going to do intake in a given semester, and they don't do it every semester, although for the most part our groups do it every spring. But if they are doing it in the spring, they'll hold what's called an informational meeting at some point, usually in February. Once they've determined those dates in consultation with their graduate chapter and national organization, they will register those dates with us and we will publicize them to the campus community. Women who are interested after attending the informational meeting submit an application packet, which is reviewed by the chapter and then by the national organization. And if a woman is chosen to join the organization, she then enters the membership intake process. That happens usually over 1 or 2 weekends, and it's an education process, usually in classrooms on campus. So it is pretty intensive where they're really learning a lot about the organization just in a couple of days. That process is supervised by local graduate or alumni members to make sure that everything's on the up and up and that the information that they're receiving is totally accurate. For our Panhellenic sororities, they use a process called membership recruitment, and it's a bit more intensive and complicated than what happens for our multicultural and PHC groups. There are a couple of important dates for you and your student to be aware of on the screen. The first of those is Tuesday, January 5th, and that's the date when registration closes at 5 p.m. Central Time. Registration is currently open on the Fraternity and Sorority Program's website, greek.tulane.edu, and early registration closes on Friday, December 4th. That's the last day of classes. Until that point, the registration is $50. And after that point, so between December 5th and January 5th, registration incurs a $20 late fee for a total of $70. Once registration closes on January 5th, everything that may affect a student's eligibility for recruitment also has to be taken care of. So if your student perhaps had an incomplete in a course and is working with a professor to finish off that course and have a grade assigned, which will then bring her to having 12 hours and verify that her GPA is a 2.5, that needs to be taken care of no later than 5 p.m. on the 5th. If she is contesting a grade and hoping that a professor will review her work and see whether perhaps she did a little better than that professor originally thought, that also needs to be taken care of by the 5th. On Thursday, January 7th, which is a few days early, the residence halls will open for potential new members, and that's a term you'll hear us use a lot. Potential new members are those who are going through the recruitment process, and we abbreviate that as PNMs. The res halls open at 5 p.m., and that is because women need to be back on campus for recruitment, which is our orientation program, recruitment kickoff, no later than noon on Friday, January 8th. So we suggest that students who are flying from a few hours away fly in on Thursday. So if they have any travel delays, they have time to get here with no problem by Friday at noon. The kickoff program happens in small group sessions, and so your daughter will be assigned a kickoff time based upon the recruitment counselor group that she is placed in. We won't know those groupings until mid-December, depending on when your daughter registers. So the earlier she registers, the easier it is for us, and then we're able to assign kickoff sessions in mid to late December. So the overall concepts of Panhellenic recruitment are important for parents and students to understand. The first of those is that within all of our Panhellenic organizations, in everything they do, there is an overarching concept that parity is the goal for all of our groups on a particular campus. And so the way that plays out is that if one organization has a house, the hope is that to achieve parity, all organizations will have a house. Parity also comes into play in numbers. So we hope that no organization will be significantly larger than another, or no organization will be significantly smaller than another. And so during recruitment, that means that we really preach to the potential new members that all 7 organizations are equally viable options for them. Certainly, there are some differences among our sororities, but the women in those groups all are friendly with one another. They all, as I said earlier, sort of reflect the same values, just in different ways. And so what we hope that you will help us with is encouraging your daughter that if she's interested in sorority recruitment, she should be interested in joining a sorority at Tulane, not a particular sorority that she already may have her heart set on. The way recruitment works is that there are structured days called rounds, and within those rounds there are recruitment events hosted by each organization. After each day at the end of each round of events, the potential new members will rank the sororities that they have visited that day in preferential order. And at the same time, the sororities are given a number each day of potential new members that they are allowed to invite back. That number is based on the chapter's historical performance in recruitment over the last couple of years. So if historically most of the PNMs, or a great number of the PNMs, have ranked a sorority fairly high, then they're going to be allowed to invite back fewer women, because they will need a smaller pool of women coming back to them in order to achieve the parity goal of getting the ideal size of potential new members in the end. If, in contrast, a sorority has been ranked a little bit lower traditionally by potential new members, they'll be allowed to invite a larger pool, meaning that they'll have more of a chance to get to know women who are potential new members and sort of make the sale to them, make the case that they're a really good option. So what's important to know is that because each sorority gets a different number, and because that number changes from year to year, some PNMs won't be invited back to the choices that they go into recruitment with thinking are their top choices. And some of the women are sometimes disappointed by that, and so we constantly have to counsel them that you need to keep an open mind, you need to keep your options open, and just because you started on the first day of recruitment thinking that chapter ABC was your first choice, if they haven't invited you back for the second day, that's not a reason to withdraw from recruitment. You should stay with the process and keep giving it a try and seeing if some of the other organizations that have really shown an interest in you maybe are a better fit for you than you originally thought. What we end up doing each day is processing the invitation lists from the sororities against the rankings that the PNMs have made. And so each woman gets her own individual schedule in each successive round of recruitment. So to go into a little more detail, because I've probably confused you a bit by this point, the first round of recruitment happens on Saturday, January 9th, and at that point, all PNMs visit all sororities. They're in what are called their recruitment counselor groups, and recruitment counselors are upper-class women in the sororities who have disaffiliated from their groups for the period of sorority recruitment. They do that to serve as sort of peer counselors, and in many ways they are kind of like camp counselors. They lead the women around from sorority house to sorority house, but they're also there to serve as a sounding board and talk through with the potential new members their ideas, their reflections back about the groups that they've visited. So on the first day, they visit all the sororities in their recruitment counselor groups. It's a long day. We have space available in the Lavin Burdick Center. We sort of take over the second floor of the LBC for the 2 weekends of recruitment. And so there are breaks throughout the day, and so your daughter can just come hang out here with other women from her residence hall floor or from her recruitment counselor group. We have movies going. If they've had any assignments already given to them by professors in advance of classes starting, they can work on those. But that is a long, full day for them. At the end of that day, as I mentioned, they rank the sororities that they visited in preferential order, and that evening the sororities make their invitation lists of the women they're most interested in inviting back. We process their schedules early the next morning, and when the women arrive on Sunday the 10th for the second round, each woman receives her individual schedule of which groups she has been invited back to. During that second round, they can attend a maximum of 6 events, be invited back by a maximum of 6 sororities. It is not unusual for someone not to be invited back to the full schedule of groups that they could attend. In fact, it is unusual for someone to have a full schedule. It's very common going into the second round for someone to be invited only to between 3 and 5 organizations. And by no means should a woman be disappointed by that. Following the second round, they once again rank their preferences. The sororities compiled their invitation lists, turn those into us, and then the women go to class for a week. And we hope that they're not worried about sorority recruitment at all. We know in reality they probably are a little bit, but fortunately it's the first week of classes, so things are just starting to get into gear academically. Then the second weekend, after they've completed the first week of classes, we start up again on Saturday. The potential new members are able to visit a maximum of 4 sororities, and again, it is unusual for someone to have a full schedule of 4 at that point. Very common for folks to have 2 or 3 at that point. Following those events, which are what's called our sisterhood round, the women who are potential new members rank the preferences of those groups that they have visited that day. The sororities compile their invitation list, and we go through the whole process again. The final round is what's called the preference round. It takes place on Sunday, January 17th, and at that point the potential new members visit a maximum of 2 sororities, but again, 1, totally normal. And following that night of events, things are a little bit different. At that point, the recruitment counselors are no longer available to speak with the students because we don't want them to be unduly influenced by those upper class women who may find it a little bit difficult to counsel somebody not to join their own sorority. And so at that point, we make staff available from throughout the Division of Student Affairs. We usually have about 40 or 50 staff members who come and help us out that night. And there are 2 important things to know here. The first of those is that as soon as a woman attends her final preference event, she enters a period mandated by the National Panhellenic Conference, which is the umbrella for all of our groups, and that period is called strict silence. At that point, she's not allowed to speak to anyone from any of the sororities at all. We also pretty strongly enforce that they shouldn't be talking to anybody but a student affairs staff member. So we don't want them calling their mom. We don't want them calling their sister. We don't want them calling their best friend at another school. We don't let them speak to one another. We really want them to make this decision about ranking the groups that they've seen that night and deciding what they really believe the best fit for them is by themselves. It's a really personal decision, and we want them to make it on their own. Certainly, we encourage them to talk with their parents throughout the process, but at this point, we really want them to start thinking a little bit more independently and make their own decision. The other thing that's important about that night, however, is that when they make that decision on their own, they sign an agreement called the Membership Recruitment Acceptance Binding Agreement. And it is a binding agreement which says that any sorority that they list on that agreement sheet is one that they are willing to join, and that if they receive an invitation to membership from one of those groups that they have listed, that they understand that if they choose not to accept that invitation to membership, they can't join another sorority on this campus for a calendar year. So it's really important that they think through which groups they write down on that binding agreement. They only have the option of listing those that they have visited that day. And it's important they understand that they don't have the opportunity later to say, oh, I don't think I want to stick with this group. I want to join the other one that I went to that night. They can't do that for a full year. This is something we spend an incredible amount of time explaining to the women throughout the recruitment process. We introduce them to it a little bit at our Panhellenic Preview Day, which is Sunday, November 15th. We talk in great detail during the kickoff sessions, and then in almost excruciating detail to make sure they understand it on preference night when they're actually filling out their agreements. Following that night, the women go back to their residence halls. They kind of relax with some nervous energy because they can't wait for the next day to find out whether they have received a bid from an organization, and if so, from which group. Bid day takes place on Monday, January 18th in the afternoon, and following the extension of bids, the sororities all take their potential new members and all their chapter members to some fun activity. So they'll go roller skating together or rent out an entire bowling alley and have fun doing that together. It's just a really great day for them to celebrate recruitment being over and the excitement for the potential new members joining a new group and for the chapters having this new energy within the chapter. So parents often ask us, how do we help our daughter decide which one she should join? And there are a couple of different things we want folks to know and that they should think about. The first is this concept that we refer to as mutual selection. And what that means is that recruitment and membership intake are both mutual selection processes, meaning that both the potential member and the sorority chapter have to approve of the relationship between them. So it doesn't mean that the sororities get everybody who they want as their first choice. And it also doesn't mean that the potential new members always get their perceived first choice or their dream chapter. It means that both of them are okay with the relationship. And in most cases, they're far more than okay. They're thrilled with the relationship. But sometimes there is a little bit of, I'm a bit disappointed that this wasn't my first choice. And they kind of need to work through over the first few weeks of membership, whether they think they really did make the right decision. And that is totally and completely normal. But it's important for them to remember that concept of mutual selection, that the chapter wanted them to some degree, and they wanted the chapter to some degree. Another thing that's important for students and parents to think about when deciding which organizations they're most interested in is this emphasis that our national organizations have been placing over the last several years on their values. Each of the groups was founded on a set of values. And again, as I mentioned, those values are all generally pretty similar, but the way the groups reflect those values and the way they're able to articulate them is where the differences come in. One piece that's really key to remember is that all our organizations are organizations that people join for a lifetime, not just for their 4 years in college. And so we hope that we'll see our students, once they leave here, remain involved in their sororities in some way as active volunteers or supporting financially or coming back together for reunions and things like that. And so they really need to find a group that they feel some comfort with. One way they're able to do that is throughout the recruitment and intake process is asking some questions of the members. Oh, I see that your sorority nationally says its values are X, Y, and Z. Can you tell me what that means to you personally, or can you tell me what the chapter does to kind of reflect that? And the current members' ability to talk about that comfortably should tell your students a lot about what kind of a job the chapter does really living those values. Is it just something they say? Is it just something that's hung up on the wall? Or is it something that they really try to use to guide their lives? One really important way to check that is whether the values that they espouse are kind of guiding the activities that they do. So if they're a group who's, one of the first things in their value statement is about the way they serve the community, if they really do that regularly, then that shows that they're living the values, and that's a good sign. If there is a bit of a disconnect there, maybe that should give your student a little bit of pause about whether it's the right group for her. And the final thing is what I alluded to, which is that fit and comfort level. Probably the most important thing for a student to be looking at when she's thinking about which one she would rank if she's going through Panhellenic recruitment, or which organization she should pursue if she's doing membership intake with one of the NPHC or multicultural groups, is does she feel comfortable with the women there? Number one, most important thing, is it someplace where she can see herself spending the next couple of years of her college career with these people? And one thing that's great at Tulane is that we see, because we don't allow people to join until the second semester, they really maintain friendships with people who they have gotten to know on their first year residence hall floor throughout their time here. But at the same time, they still do spend a lot of time with the women in their sororities, and so that comfort level is really key. One of the things that falls into that is legacy relationships. And so a legacy is a student who is the daughter, sister, or granddaughter of a member of an organization. Some organizations also extend legacy relationships to nieces, but most of them consider daughter, granddaughter, or sister as legacies. And we do see a fair number of students who come through Tulane having some legacy relationships, and sometimes that causes a real struggle for the student to try to decide, I really want to honor my mom or my grandmother, or I'm so close with my older sister and I would love to be in the same sorority as she is at a different campus. But now that I'm here, I see that this group really isn't the one that I feel most comfortable with. And so I would encourage you, particularly if you are a parent who has a daughter who is a member of your own organization, to try to let her not limit her options just to your own organization. And I laugh now when I say that because I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I've always said, oh, I don't want her only to join my own organization. And now as I say that, I'm not so sure anymore. But try if you can not to limit your daughter to your organization, your mother's, your mother-in-law's, whatever it may be. Some general tips about recruitment. We are a campus where recommendations from alumni members are helpful, but by no means essential. We have so many students who come to Tulane who don't have a tradition of Greek membership in their family or who just don't know too many sorority alumni, and so having recommendations is just something that our chapters don't worry about all that much. It's certainly fine for somebody to have a couple of recommendations, but I would say more than 2 or 3 for an organization makes a woman stand out, and not in a good way. So if you do have friends or family members who want to write a recommendation for your daughter, really get it to somebody who knows her very well, who can really talk about her in some real specifics, and make sure that she is limiting herself as the alumni to not sending too many, not being too flowery. The addresses for where people can send recommendations to the chapters directly are all on our website. Another tip that's really important is that women who maximize their options, and that's a term we use a lot, have the best chance of being successful. And so what that means is if a woman receives invitations in our second round, for instance, to 6 organizations, but she's really thinking she's only interested in about 3 of them. So she goes to all of the events that she's required to do. They're not allowed to skip an event for a group that they're not that interested in. But if she goes to some of them and she's aloof or even rude, she's probably not going to be that successful, because the women in the sororities talk to one another and they're friends with people in different groups. And so your daughter needs to be a polite guest every place she goes, and really keep an open mind also, because she may find that a group that she thought she wasn't that interested in has some really great women who she just hadn't been exposed to yet. The Office of Fraternity and Sorority Programs and the Panhellenic Council, which is the student group that administers recruitment under our direction, can't guarantee that any student will get a bid. But we can guarantee that if she keeps an open mind, she has a really, really high likelihood of receiving a bid. And I'll talk about some of the statistics from last year to show you that in just a few minutes. Parents often have questions about what their students should wear during recruitment and exactly what the schedule looks like. And I just want to alert you that all of that information is available on our website. If you go to greek.tulane.edu and then the Prospective Members tab and then Panhellenic Council, you can find detailed information about each day with tips about what to wear that day. The one thing I would say is that comfortable shoes are essential, because there's a lot of walking involved. We tell the students that every year, and every year there's a group of them who don't believe us and are hobbling by the end of the day. So comfortable, cute flats or boots will totally work for them. The final general tip this year is a special one, and that is regarding Alpha Epsilon Phi, the sorority from the Panhellenic Council, which is suspended. We've gotten a lot of questions about whether their suspension will mean that there aren't as many spaces available for potential new members in the other groups, and that is not the case. The number of spaces available in each group is completely dependent upon the number of women who come through recruitment, so it changes every year from year to year. The number of sororities does not guide how many people are available, so A5 suspension will not mean that there aren't as many spaces, that recruitment will be more competitive. It may, however, mean that the new member classes will be a bit larger than usual. We just won't know that, however, until registration closes in January, and we won't have a true idea of what the new member classes will look like until after that final preference round. The final thing we want to talk about should your daughter join an organization is hazing prevention. It's something that we have been really focused on here at Tulane over the last couple of years. And so I think the first most important point for you to know about is just what hazing is. The definition from Tulane's Code of Student Conduct is on your screen that you can read. The other important key point to know is that a student can violate the hazing standard regardless of whether they intended to cause harm and whether the person being hazed was willing to do it. Those two things don't mean just because, oh, I didn't mean to harm them, it wasn't my intent to injure them or anything like that, or it was totally fine, everything we were doing, they liked it, no big deal. Those two things do not mean that a student has necessarily not violated the hazing policy. So there are a couple of types of hazing that experts have identified. that we want to talk about. The first of those is referred to as subtle hazing. And what that can mean here at Tulane is requiring new members to perform duties that aren't assigned to other members. So making only the new members clean up after an event at the house, or making them all go to breakfast together at 6 a.m. every week at a certain day, but the older members don't have to do that. Making them earn the right to wear certain clothes. So, you're not allowed to wear our letters, or you're not allowed to wear this t-shirt until you've done this, this, and this. Subtle, perhaps not all that harmful, but certainly something that still creates a tiered membership structure where the new members are not considered full members of the organization. And all of our groups nationally consider their new members to be full members. Even though they've not become initiated, they're still full members once they join. So that can be construed as hazing under our policies. One of the things that's a little bit tough about that is it's often not thought of as hazing at all, either by the students who are going through it themselves, the students around them, or by their parents. Harassment hazing is the next type, and this can manifest itself through some types of interrogation or lineups. So lining up the students alphabetically and asking them really minute details about the organization's history that they would have no way of knowing. Or some of the kind of horror stories you hear about lining people up by weight, or lining them up by perceived attractiveness, ugliest to prettiest, things like that, that have no purpose whatsoever as part of this type of organization, and are really only in place to demean and harass the members. We see with a little too much regularity forcing the students to wear embarrassing or silly outfits, things that are uncomfortable, things like that, and also assigning them to pranks. We want you to go to this fraternity house and try to steal their crest that's on the wall, things like that. Requiring them to do things that are illegal, obviously not a good thing, and so those can fall under the hazing policy. The final type identified by experts is what's known as violent hazing, and these are some of the sort of horror stories that we hear about. Frankly, these are things that are not as common at Tulane, certainly not among our women's groups, but they're things we still want people to be aware of. Kidnapping the members, making them be nude at any point, and that can kind of come in with that lineup by prettiest to ugliest. There have been stories of groups being forced to line up only in their underwear and things like that. That's nothing that has been reported to us during my time here at Tulane, which is 6 years, so we feel pretty good that that kind of thing isn't happening here. Paddling or whipping is something that is more common within the men's groups, although not at Tulane, but it is something we want folks to be aware of. The one thing I would say that happens at Tulane that falls under this category is forced consumption of alcohol. So to be really specific about some of the things that happen here, subtle and harassment hazing are the most common. As I said, forced consumption is something that we do see in the women's groups, and I would say that for the most part, there is not even an organized effort by the members to force that consumption. It tends to be more along the lines of implied requirement. Oh, we really, really, really want you to do this, as opposed to, here, you must drink this fifth of Jack Daniels. It's much more common for the students to feel as though they don't have a choice not to consume something, as opposed to them having someone standing over them requiring them to do it. Embarrassing acts, however, are more common here than we would like them to be, and so that's why we want to be sure parents are educated about the types of hazing here. Experts have identified that there can be sort of a slippery slope of some of those lower order hazing activities. And it's pretty common for us to have conversations with parents saying, I'm not really sure what the big deal is. Yeah, my daughter had to do something kind of silly and embarrassing, but what's the problem? And frankly, we understand that sentiment to some degree. But what's important for parents to know is that there has been this concept identified by mental health experts and those who do hazing research referred to as hidden harm. What we've seen over the last couple of years is that we have an increasing number of students coming to Tulane with pre-existing conditions, whether they be mental health conditions, whether they be pre-existing medical conditions from a sports injury or traumatic brain injury, something like that. And those are things that aren't always readily noticeable to students who in a group that they've just joined, and they're certainly not the types of things that students readily disclose to people in a group that they have just joined where they want to gain acceptance. And so If a student, for instance, is pressured heavily to drink, but the students who are doing the pressuring don't realize that they have a history of addiction within their family, or perhaps the student has already battled substance abuse. That student doesn't feel like he or she can say no, but it could really trigger something terrible happening to them. And so that's why we want the students to be aware of the dangers of some of the things that they do. Last year, our Office of Student Conduct conducted 2 hazing investigations of sororities, and those concerns were reported. We actually had 4 reports submitted to us, but only 2 of those were things that were serious enough for student conduct to get involved in. Concerns came from faculty members, from parents, from fellow students, from members of the group, and the 2 groups where the investigations happened were Kappa Kappa Gamma. They were found not responsible for violating the hazing policy, but they did plead responsible to violating the alcohol policy. And then Alpha Epsilon Phi, they pled responsible to violating the hazing policy and the drug policy. They pled responsible after working with the chapter officers and the national staff and national board. And so they accepted a 1-year suspension. And so as I mentioned earlier, they are not operating this year. It is our hope and certainly our expectation that they will continue to abide by the conditions of their suspension and that they will return to active status in June of 2016. There are a couple of hazing prevention resources available to parents. There is extensive information on our website. There's a hazing prevention tab at greek.tulane.edu. There are also a couple of national websites. Hazingprevention.org is a really well-respected organization that has many things on its website, and there is also a national hazing hotline. But 2 things I want to draw your immediate attention to are ways that you as a parent can report any concerns you may have either about your own student or one of your student's friends. The first of those is our online concerns reporting form. You may be familiar with that already, and that's tulane.edu/concerns. On that reporting form, you can submit any type of concern that you may have, and you can do so by including your name or by including your name and asking to remain anonymous. The other of those is our 24-hour hazing hotline, the number for which is on our screen, and you can leave a confidential message there. Once again, you can do so without leaving your name, but in both of those cases, the online concerns reporting form and the hazing hotline, we ask that folks calling or reporting do include contact information and then indicate that they would like to remain anonymous. That really helps if student conduct gets to the investigative phase so they can ask some follow-up questions. Often folks think that they're giving us enough information to go on and open an investigation, and that may not actually be the case. So it helps us tremendously if we can follow up with somebody and just ask a couple of questions. The one thing I like to tell folks to reassure them that we are able to keep their identity and confidence is in the 6 years that I've been here, we have done countless hazing investigations, upwards of 30 of those. And there have been organizations that we have suspended. There have been organizations that we have closed permanently, and so that's obviously caused a lot of angst among some of the groups. And there have been many others that we have given more minor penalties to that have been allowed to remain on campus, but still have caused some upset. And in all of those cases, with the exception of one, in all of those cases, the identity of the person who reported it has never been revealed. The one time that it has been revealed was when a student himself reported to the university that he was being hazed, resigned from the group, and then told the members, "I'm the one who turned you in because I was so disgusted with the way you were treating me." And so I tell that to make sure that you firmly believe us, that we take very seriously our obligation to keep our sources confidential and anonymous. So the last thing we want to talk about is what if it doesn't work out? What if your daughter is somebody who came to Tulane really thinking she was going to join a sorority, seeing herself as a sorority woman, and she goes through recruitment, or she applies for membership intake and isn't accepted, or she goes through Panhellenic recruitment and just gets overwhelmed and decides she doesn't want to do it, or she doesn't get a bid in the end, or she doesn't get a bid from one of the groups that she really wants. How do we handle that? So the first thing we want to talk about is the Panhellenic statistics from recruitment. Last year, 694 women started the recruitment process, and in the end, 567 of them joined. So that's an 82% placement rate, which we feel pretty good about. The national average hovers more around 75%, and so that tells us that our potential new members are doing a really good job of keeping their options open, and our chapters are doing a good job of assessing the folks who are the best fit for them. Of those 694, and of the 127 who didn't join, 10 of them were at some point released from the process, meaning that at some point they didn't receive any invitations back from anyone. And 117 of them, the great majority, withdrew from the process at some point. So either, as I mentioned, they just got overwhelmed, or more commonly, they decided that the groups that they had left on their schedules were the ones that they weren't that interested in, and so they decided to withdraw. Of those who stayed all the way through the process and completed a membership recruitment acceptance binding agreement, all but one, so there were 568 of them who did an MRABA. The one who did not receive a bid did not because she had two choices available and she chose only to list one, and she was not in the top group of that one that she had listed, so she did not receive a bid. But everybody else, so 567 of 568 who went all the way through did receive a bid, and 87% of those matched to their first choice among the one or two that they had left. So we feel pretty good about that rate. For those who withdraw or who are released, we have a really robust internal communication system that's happening in real time. So as soon as we process the invitation lists and those schedules are distributed to the students at the beginning of each round of recruitment, the peer recruitment counselors report back to our staff if there are any women who've decided to withdraw, or we know if there's anyone who has been released. And then they also report back to us if there's anybody who is really upset. Regardless of whether someone is reported to us as upset or not, we send a list of anybody who has been released or anybody who has withdrawn to a group of people within the university each day. So there's always a student affairs professional on call. That's generally a person who works within housing and residence life. That person gets the list. There's a student resources and support services staff member who is on call. That person gets the list. And then our academic advising team gets the list as well. On the next business day, our counseling and psychological services staff also gets the list because they're not on call over the weekend. That goes to the SRSS folks. For the housing component, the professional staff within housing, the live-in professional staff, if somebody who falls on that list is a student who they know personally, they will go and check on the student and do a subtle check-in. If it's not somebody who they know personally, they'll ask the resident advisor to do it because we know that the RAs know their students. And again, they do that in a subtle way. Hey, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Would you like to go grab some coffee? Sometimes the students really want to talk. Sometimes they just want to be by themselves. And so we make sure that somebody lays eyes on them to ensure that they're not upset, that they're okay, or that if they are upset, that they've got the resources available to them to deal with it, that they've called home, that they've talked to their parents, that they've got a way to get off campus if they want to, that they've got somebody to have lunch with that day so they can talk it all through. And then the final thing that happens is that the Monday following bid day, our colleagues in the Office of Student Programs, which is also under the same Student Affairs umbrella as we are, they sponsor the Spring Student Organization Fair. And so that's where the other 200+ organizations on campus set up their tables and make available to first-year students and transfers information about how to join. So if your student is somebody who really thought she was going to join a sorority and it doesn't work out, then she's got an opportunity to find out what other areas she can get involved in on campus. If your student is somebody who recruitment doesn't work out for in her first year and she's thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll do it next year, a couple of important points. The first is that some of our organizations do recruit in the fall, but that's on a pretty limited basis. A Panhellenic organization can only recruit in the fall if their membership numbers fall below the average chapter size. So because it's an average, it's usually only two or three of those who fall below the average size, and they're usually not able to recruit more than about 15 or 20 members. They're just trying to get up to that average size. Next year may be a little bit different, because with Alpha Epsilon Phi returning to campus, they will have the option to do a fall recruitment if they would like to and to recruit upper class women. We don't know yet whether they will choose to do that. That will be a decision that the chapter will make in consultation with their national organization once they're back. And so we probably won't know whether they're choosing to do that until late August or early September. So I would say people shouldn't depend on the fact that they may be recruiting in the fall, because we just don't know yet whether that will happen. A student, however, can go through recruitment again as an upperclasswoman if she hasn't joined, or if she's signed that membership recruitment acceptance binding agreement and decided not to go through with the chapter that she listed there. She can recruit again in the spring. And it's important to know, though, that the great majority of that 694 who went through recruitment last year were first-year students. Only about 50 or 60 of those were upper-class women, and a lot of the group that withdrew were the sophomores, because it's pretty common for a sophomore to go through recruitment with her heart set on joining a particular chapter. And if she's not invited to that group, it's pretty common for her just to say, you know, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. Maybe sorority isn't the right thing for me. So we do have some resources that you can check out. There is extensive information, as I've mentioned a couple of times, on our website, which is greek.tulane.edu. The National Pan-Hellenic Council, which is, again, for our historically black organizations, has a robust website with information about all of their groups. Our multicultural groups do not belong to the same umbrella national umbrella organization, and so you would just need to go to their individual websites, deltaxinu.org or gamma-rho-lambda.org, if you were looking for information about them. For information in general about the National Pan-Hellenic Conference, which is the organization that sets policies that all campuses follow during Pan-Hellenic recruitment, you can go to their website. And they also have a companion website called sororityparents.com that has a lot of Q&A information. It's got some personal statements from parents of sorority women across the country. And then finally, once again, our website has contact information, both for our staff and for the students who are leaders in organizations, should you want to join any of them. So in closing, I just want to thank you for joining us and reiterate, as I have several times, if you have any questions at any point, please do not hesitate to contact us. I serve as the primary advisor to our Interfraternity Council, and so if you have specific questions about sorority recruitment, I would encourage you to contact our Assistant Director, Julia Hankins, but if you can't reach her, you are certainly welcome to contact me as well. Thanks so much for joining us.